Hey there, guys. I just finished watching, or just wanted to comment on, the Half-Life 2 documentary and just reflecting on Half-Life 2, its impact, and also PC games in general. It's just really interesting to me that, Half-Life 2, I think the biggest thing I got out of its documentary, about its development, is, why they stopped making episodes and why they really kind of ceased that whole kind of pipeline. And so Gabe was like, oh yeah, I know, we learned a lot of stuff about shipping things, shipping smaller projects, kind of doing little implementations and stuff, and that helped them with their other games. And what he said was really, really interesting, which is that we didn't do episode 3. He says we could have done episode 3. It was very easy, very simple to do it. We could have shipped it, but we didn't do it because we felt like it didn't justify the Half-Life style, or the idea that it was pushing the technology further. And so it's this idea that we could have shipped Half-Life episode 3, 4, 5, but it would be just a series of different kind of gimmicks, and it wouldn't be as impactful as the first games were. And that really got me thinking, when they went into this project to really make it, they were pushing like the technology to the absolute zenith, or epicenter of what they could possibly do. And so it's kind of like, it's Reggie saying, well, if it's not fun, why bother? Well, Gabe is saying, well, if it's not innovative, why bother? And again, I find it's very interesting that what people claim to be the most realistic game with physics puzzles and everything is coming from a guy who says that realism is not interesting. Like Gabe was, this was actually in the previous documentary, the first Half-Life one, where he said, someone would come to him and say, well, that's not realistic that we put that in a game. And he said, well, why is that interesting? Don't tell me it's not realistic if you don't have it has to be cool and engaging. And I still think it's so funny that, again, Gaben is this guy who came from making operating systems and spreadsheets and stuff, and he's here making a game, just trying it out for like a year or whatever, and then it takes off. And it's so interesting that, again, they decided not to do another Half-Life really until Half-Life Alyx. And again, it shows their philosophy in design as a game designer, where if the actual mechanics of the game do not have a super huge innovation, then they're not going to do a game like that. So all this hype around Half-Life 3, coming out, the idea that it's going to be a industry changing, shaping thing, it's like, yeah, they did a huge jump from Half-Life 1 to Half-Life 2, and people saw how innovative mechanically it was. It had physics and reflective surfaces and all still very impressive stuff, where I would say even the format and the presentation of Half-Life and a lot of its tropes still hold true today. It really defined a lot of gaming tropes and standards that even today people struggle with getting correct, especially on the physics side for some reason. And so it was such a huge leap in innovation. And it's funny because the other thing I think about is there's also another company that also kind of has that same philosophy, which is surprisingly Nintendo. And maybe not with their mainline series like Zelda. I mean, Zelda, they had to retransform. They had to turn it from a linear dungeon style game with a semi-open world to a fully open world game, and redefine the open world genre. In the short term, until Genshin Impact, the most profitable game, I think ever, just ripped it off, right? With Mario, he's kind of actually stayed more or less the same, but they've always tried to add new mechanics, new ways to actually play the game. They're really focused on the playing of it. But with their older series for F-Zero GX, I think they were interviewed, why isn't there a new F-Zero game? F-Zero GX was so good. And they said that's the problem, that F-Zero GX is a perfect game. Because they said, we've looked at the formula and we don't know how we can make it better. We don't know how to make it, good. Or to fulfill the vision of the creator, because F-Zero GX is a perfect game because it completed and fulfilled the vision of what that person had for it. And so Nintendo's perspective on this is that if we can't innovate, then we're not going to bother making a new sequel to a game, which might be contradictory in some cases or some series. But for the most part, that's why you don't see sequels from their classic games, like Star Fox even. The last thing they were able to do with F-Zero is do F-Zero 99 on the Switch, which is a free-to-play game where you basically had a Battle Royale F-Zero game. And, that could have maybe been a full-fledged game or something, maybe, but they decided not to give it that attention. But it's so interesting that that same perspective applies here, where, Gaben could have shipped Half-Life 3, or, even Half-Life episode whatever, or Half-Life 3 itself, but it's so interesting that what we want and what it would be would not fulfill that idea. I mean, the jump of technology from Half-Life 1 to Half-Life 2 was massive, and he kind of, from Gaben's perspective, the reason he didn't make Half-Life 3 is because that same jump and that same shock value and that kind of, division of their team that worked on making the best possible game with the best possible technology simply was impossible. They kind of literally blew their load with Half-Life 2, where it's like, okay, this is the best possible game we can make, and they realized that they kind of just hit a wall where they couldn't make another amazing new innovation. And you think about the innovations from Half-Life 2 to now, from 2004 to 2024, and there are things that have been created, like more online multiplayer. I know it's like Dark Souls mechanics, different kinds of ways to do certain kind of game modes. But for the most part, in terms of graphics, physics, gameplay, the whole FPS, mode of play, that has not changed since Half-Life 2. And it's not like Valve is lazy. No one else has really come along and innovated in that space. I mean, yeah, okay, you have Halo with regenerating, Halo was before that with regenerating HP, but you have Call of Duty, and all the Call of Duty clones, but the actual formula that Half-Life established, that is the standard, that is the vision, and it was really meshing technology with gaming on a scale that made sense, where the technology almost came first. And this leads me into another thing, which is that a lot of people are arguing, about Half-Life 2 now, and I personally experienced this where, PC gamers for the longest time said that Half-Life 2 was the greatest game ever made. And I thought, well, on Nintendo, we have Ocarina of Time. On PlayStation, it might be maybe something like Metal Gear Solid or Devil May Cry 3. On Xbox, it's definitely Halo for their best game ever or whatever. And so for PC, I was like, okay, here's all the hype. Let's play Half-Life 2. And I found it to be very okay. Half-Life 2 on its own, isolated, is a perfectly fine, decent game. It's good. It has good characters, good story, good atmosphere, good music. But there's nothing about the game that made me say, wow, best game ever. And it's so interesting that that's the case. And a lot of people feel that way because, they look back on this thing. And I mean, it's so interesting to, again, look back at the reveal of Half-Life 2 at whatever it was, E3 or whatever, because the jump in graphics from the G-Man from 1 to 2 again was insane. And you have to retrospectively almost appreciate 2004 was during the golden age. There were a lot of games coming out, so not everyone had their eyes on Half-Life 2. I certainly did have my eyes on Half-Life 2. I was probably playing some Zeldas or GameCube or whatever. So there was just so much stuff happening that a lot of people, I think, just kind of missed the boat if you weren't on PC at that time. But looking in kind of the time capsule era of that presentation, of the reveal of Half-Life 2, I thought, oh my God, what's coming out in that year? It's I think Wind Waker is 2003. Knights of the Republic, but this game is so ahead of its time and such a bombshell in the industry, but it's only from a technical perspective. So I can understand and appreciate why people said at the time why Half-Life 2 was the best game ever, because on a purely technical standpoint, objectively, it was. And the reason we're looking at it now, that, you know, people say, has it aged poorly? Has it fallen off? Were people just lying? It's I think what it is that at the time, people were looking at it differently, where they were, you know, I mean, to me, it's kind of obvious that, you know, despite a technical prowess of games that, I don't know, it's kind of like the people who are on Moore's Law or whatever, where it's like, and this is the idea that is just foreign to me, because for me, I play games for narrative, because if a story is good in the game, if an experience and a gameplay thing is good in the game, it stays good. It doesn't get worse. Examples, like classic examples, are like Tetris, Pac-Man. Like, those are still fun games, especially Tetris. Like, you can just keep playing that over and over and over again, and you just never get bored of it, because it is just like a game archetypical thing in itself. And with Half-Life, it's Half-Life 2, it's like, yeah, okay, this is very technically progressive and everything, and it just comes from a different mindset of the PC mindset, which is what I'm realizing, where they think as time goes on and as technology increases, games will get better. And it's so interesting that you have this very left-brain technical view of what games are, video games really, that, and like Half-Life 2 story is not bad at all, but the stories of other games are equally as good, if not way better. And for me, that was the big thing, like Ocarina of Time story, even Halo story, like stories in games at that same time that were competing with Half-Life 2. Like, they were doing like the really cool stuff. KOTOR, for example, like, has some of the best writing in a game ever, like period. So, and again, they were all competing in all these different fronts, and that's great. But again, when you look at it now, it's like there is still, again, like, I would still recommend KOTOR today. I would still recommend Ocarina of Time. I would still kind of recommend Half-Life 2, but it's almost like in the way that it's a little bit of a quaint time capsule. It's like, oh, this was really impressive at the time. And so, and of course what happened is the idea that, oh, as time progresses, as we move on, and as technology gets bigger and bigger, we can make bigger games, put more stuff in our games, make games run faster. The games have not gone better, and that's because there is this blind spot where we're missing the, I don't know, the in-between, or the duality of technology and art. And creativity and technology meshing between those two. And, you know, we kind of had the beginning of the video game era in the 70s, where it was just all technology, and then the artists really came in the 90s, and now it's become corporatized. And I've been over this many times, that, you know, you have bronze, gold, silver eras, and right now we're kind of in the midst of the kind of tail end of the silver era from 2010 to 2030, where you have a hit there, here and there, but when technology and creativity really meshed together between roughly 1990 and 2010, that's where everything really amazing was made. And again, this is in the smack middle of that. But yeah, as technology has gotten more and more, you know, impressive, the output of the creativity and the actual design of games being fun has actually decreased. Games now feel more like chores and scams and schemes, and it's just a very sad state. But it's kind of like, yeah, this is what it's like. So, you know, it's interesting that, you know, what people kept ranting and like, I wouldn't mind if people were kind of honest about it, but when you've been told over and over again that this is the greatest game of all time, and you play it and you're like, that was like a normal shooter, it's because everyone's like adapted and molded to that. And there are some games that I'd say are still very old, but still like very good. And if people just said Half-Life was a great game rather than the best game of all time, I wouldn't have the shock or the experience that I had when I actually finally sat down and played it. And I think it's so interesting when I think about this, because as I go into more of the mentality of the idea of Half-Life 2 and what it meant, like, again, it's super technically impressive, but it also leads into like PC gamers as a culture too, where it's become a meme at this point. But, you know, you'll buy the most expensive PC, the most high-end graphics card, you'll customize everything, you'll optimize your settings, and nowadays you just don't even fully use your computing power. You just play older classic games that are actually designed and were made to be fun, rather than playing what your computer can actually run. And so it's objectively, again, it's like objectively all of your specs and design and whatever, and the construction of what is essentially a children's toy. I mean, it's kind of this dichotomy, right? That we're, using children's toys and, interacting with them and playing with them. But at the same time, they're telling these amazing, incredible stories or experiences. And the dichotomy between, oh, well, it's not a children's toy because consoles are children's toys. I'm building a personal computer. It's not just doesn't play games. It can play the best games ever, but it can also do everything else. And so it's kind of, I don't know, like some kind of weird insecurity cope for some people. And so these were the PC Master Race people that said, well, I customized my PC. I've got all the best parts, all the best graphics cards, everything. It can play anything. And there's no way in hell I'm going to downgrade to a, even though it's a super cheap console or whatever, I can do everything on PC, and everything's free on PC too. So, why conceivably would I ever do that? And it's so funny because even after all that, if you ever ask them, so what games do you enjoy to play? And it's either like the game they've played since childhood and just replaying that, or like 500,000 hours in Counter-Strike or TF2, and it's like they don't actually play games. And I understand this because I've met people who are like this, where they will invest all this technical aspect, and like it's just so funny to be like, even Gaben himself, he built systems and operating systems and the world of very technical hardline spreadsheets, and and he builds Steam and all this stuff. And so at the end of the day, he like makes a system, but he doesn't even fully use it, and that's fine, because there are different people in the world who make different things. Like you might build, the road on which the cars drive, but you don't actually drive on that road. You might actually design, the house that someone lives in, but you're not living in it yourself. And so it's so interesting that PC mentality of highly technical, nerdy prowess and making the most powerful machine and then not actually using it for anything it's this self-fulfilling meme or prophecy. And you see it a lot too with what I like to call Steam disease, or novoludophobia, which is the fear of playing new games. I mean, I can't tell you over the years how many posts I've seen of people saying, yeah, no, I can run thousands of games. I have thousands of games pirated. I have thousands of games in my Steam library, and I love, buying sales and getting a good deal. But I'm terrified of starting it. And I keep hearing the same thing where it's like they'll argue about games, they'll talk about games, but then when it comes time to actually play a game, it's so interesting because the dichotomy finally reaches its zenith, where it's like, okay, you've invested all this time and energy to make the perfect system to run this thing, but when you actually run the thing, your brain is saying, oh, wait a second, this actually is a completely frivolous, empty activity. It is literally a game. There's no tangible objective benefit to doing this. It's like a subjective thing. And so it's just, I know, it's such a dad core thing where your dad is the one who sets up like your Christmas toy or something, but of course he's not going to play with it. But you need to figure out how the thing works and whatever. And maybe, I don't know, maybe if you're super insecure, which I think a lot of them were, these, PC nerd guys that, oh, well, I don't have this, or I don't have that, and I can't do this, but I can make the best PC in the world. And you know what? That's where I put on my value. And so you have this religious zealotry online over the years where PC people would like mog and dab and make fun of console fags and all this stuff because they perceived it as, oh, well, you're just uneducated baby stupid peasants who just play your stupid Mario games, and while I have a big Chad PC. And so they tied their value to their work and their effort. And PCs, in general too, it's a sunk cost thing if you don't use it, because PCs are always and have been traditionally, up until almost recently with the PS5, they've always been way more expensive to do a gaming PC than it hard it is to do a console. And so they tied all their value, narcissism, and insecurity into that, and their technical prowess over story or art or whatever, any of the creative aspects. And that translates to the PC Master Race meme, where like on every forum ever, like you just couldn't argue with them because, you know, they were like, well, we have the best, you know, PC Master Race. I laugh at you stupid, you know, console peasants or whatever. I think Oni Cartoons, no, not Oni, Flash Goods makes a great series about that. And then you have like, you know, so you have the, you know, the PC Chad, you know, making fun of all the console peasants. But then you have like a higher spec PC Chad making fun of like the lower PC Chad and saying, oh, well, I have an AMD Ryzen, you know, whatever graphics card. And I mean, that's pretty much it in a nutshell. I mean, that one animation just really ties it up, but it was just insufferable because people would say, oh, well, I have the best system, the best whatever, but they would never play anything. They would just argue endlessly about it, and their insecurity and their nonsense would just flow. And that's why I've always been very negative and I guess biased against PC gaming, because of these people who essentially were hyper insecure and had to like tout themselves up based on their hobby. And, you know, I game on PC now because, you know, I think, and so my philosophy is like, you just play the game on the console or the system it was designed for. So there are some games I would definitely play on PC and some games I wouldn't. And I don't know, I just think it's so funny that whole mentality about that only a PC person would consider Half-Life 2 to be the best game ever because it has those technical aspects. But then they also get blindsided by, I would say, or argue, the romantic side of Half-Life 2, which is the story, the characters, the mechanics, the level, the atmosphere, all that other intangible stuff that I come to gaming for, is the stuff that they were like mesmerized by. And so because they didn't have an exposure to anything better than that, they touted it as, you know, one of the best stories ever, when like compared to what other games were doing, it was not even close. So and it's really upsetting too, because even in Half-Life 2's, you know, universe, it basically ends on a cliffhanger at the end of episode 2 with like with a major character death, and it's completely unresolved. Apparently they did some sort of thing in Half-Life Alyx, but who cares? It's a VR game. So you have that basically occur, and people are just left on this painful cliffhanger. So you can understand from a PC person's perspective the absolute pain and tragedy of being stuck on a, you know, being you know, like appreciating the technical prowess, the design of this game, and then being left on an emotional cliffhanger for over a decade. It's like the worst, like, hey son, we just had a great game of catch, I'm gonna go out and get some milk, I'll be right back, and you haven't seen him for 10 years. It's the most emotionally like detached dad emotion relationship moment I've ever seen in a fan base ever, to just get up and leave like that. And that's why the hype around Half-Life 3 was so huge over the years, because you could see that, you know, it wasn't just, oh, we want the next big jump in technology. And that's what they said. There was this argument I heard a lot that console gaming was holding back PC gaming. And I thought, how is that possible? Just make the games on PC. Like, what's stopping you? And it's funny because console gamers were innovating, but not in the technological side, but in like design wise. Like, okay, like something like innovative in even the modern day is Vampire Survivors or whatever. They just took a segment of Castlevania and reduced it. They didn't add to it. They took the Castlevania formula and like mixed it up and reduced it to a very simple formula, which became a completely different new thing that was really fun. So, you know, so the consoles have always been more artistically driven rather than technology driven, and so and more design driven, and so that's why they have more dynamic and more fun games, you know, arguably. And on PC, they also have their own segment of games for sure. Like, for example, like, you cannot play an RTS on a console. You have to play an RTS or anything that requires a very specific movement and aiming on PC. So things like Counter-Strike as a shooter, RTS games, point-and-click adventure games, stuff like that. So that things that lived and grew up on the PC belong on the PC, in my opinion. So, it does have its own era of, creativity and innovation and all that stuff. But at a certain point, maybe because of pirating, maybe because of something else, the market shifted to, like, developers focused all their time and attention on consoles. And the only people who stayed on PC were looking at the PC as a way to push technology rather than game design. And you see that with things like Crysis. Like when Crysis came out 2007, Crysis was basically Half-Life 3. The Half-Life 3 people wanted. It was like, it had the best and it still holds up today. Like I played it recently, and like, yeah, like the graphics, like the mechanics, the gunplay, like it's really well made. But again, the kind of the flow of the campaign is, just very similar to Half-Life. The story is non-existent compared to Half-Life 2. It's like, oh, there's aliens, let's shoot them. Like it's like Independence Day. It's like a very surface level. But you can see that, simply pursuing technical prowess does nothing for, I don't know, the human soul, you could say. There's nothing there besides, oh wow, look, I can, generate a realistic sunset. Well, even consoles at a certain point were able to do the exact same thing. Around, I don't know, 2010 roughly is when you had the threshold, or 2008 or 7, when really, I think the first game for me was honestly Mass Effect 1, where I thought, wow, that actually looks like very realistic. Once you got realistic or photorealistic graphics, even on consoles, and PC wasn't really that much far ahead, it kind of became, okay, so what's the point of having a PC? That's been a long running thing, and an argument even between consoles that, oh well, PS3 has better graphics, Xbox 360 doesn't. Like, look at these graphics. And I've always said, why in the name of the Lord would I care about what the game looks like? Like, okay, yeah, it looks nice, looks pretty, but I knew at some point we're going to hit a wall where it's like the graphics are going to just look like real life. And then what? Like, I'm not, if you want a nice graphic, my friend has always said, well, here's a nice, wallpaper. Here's a nice image. Here's a nice graphic. You can't play it though. And yeah, it's absolutely right. Like once graphics have plateaued, which I think happened now, even if a few years ago, maybe in like 2020 or even before that, maybe like 2015, like all games just look the same now. And now it's like everyone's kind of standing here with their hands in their pockets. Like, what do we do now? Like, and from a technological perspective, like the gold rush is over. The excitement is over. No one's going to jump in and discover some brand new technology that suddenly you can smell the game now. Like, I don't know, maybe that'll be Half-Life 3. But, it shows Valve's philosophy is that, if we want to really innovate or use a whole new, brand new technology, we're going to make a Half-Life game. And that's why Half-Life Alyx happened. And VR gaming, unfortunately, has not taken off, and I don't think it will take off because it's too clunky, it's too onerous. It fundamentally is not making things easier. When you had PC to console, you have a controller now, and the controller makes things simply easier, streamlined, and it just makes the experience simpler. With VR, you're adding a whole new dimension to the game. But to actually access it and get into it and really take advantage of it, it's very onerous right now. It's not easy to just pick up and play. If I had to speculate with my armchair, what's going to be the future of the next technology that really takes off, that is really is worthy of Half-Life 3 or the next big change in gaming, I would say is AR. The ability to put on a pair of glasses and suddenly to have a game in front of you, and to play that and to actually have a super cool interactive experience. Like, oh my god, like a geolocator game where you have to go out into the real world and have a cinematic experience somehow. I don't know, that'd be super cool, but again, it wouldn't be able to match, I think, the thing of sitting alone in a room with a screen telling you an in-depth immersive story. I don't think you can actually beat something better than that in terms of a deep emotional tangible experience that changes you as a person. uh, I think it's like reading a book. It's like you're getting lost in the world and learning so much so quickly that it's like very intense and very memorable because of that. And I just don't think anything like that is going to come along. And now it's just about, the variations of design, of storytelling, or whatever. And it was funny too, because I mean, in terms of story, like at the time, there was no precedent for what a video game story should be. And ironically, I would definitely argue, if not say it's obvious, that video game stories at that time were way more interesting, way more engaging than a lot of the movies coming out. I mean, if you discount things like, if you remove things like The Matrix, Lord of the Rings, The Bourne Identity, Star Wars, if you just, those are the top in my opinion, but if you remove those, like the average movie did not have a nearly as engaging story. I would say Half-Life 2 definitely had a better story than most movies, even though it was told in a very convoluted, that's the worst thing I hate about Half-Life 2's story, about Half-Life in general, is that it never gives you clear answers. It gives you a lot of stuff that's going on, like, okay, these are combines, so they're combinations of the alien races and human races, and Dr. Breen has made a deal with them to take over the human race before they're all combined or exterminated. Like, it's not very clear, and it's not super clear unless you go to like the wiki or something. And I'm very much against that. It's like, I've played enough games now where I'm able to know whether or not the story is being told well or not, if I'm the problem or the story is the problem. And Half-Life 2's story is fairly good. It's just, it refuses to be clear and certain on many, many things, and it even ends on a cliffhanger. So it's not even clear on that, right? I think Half-Life Alyx did some kind of time loop thing where they went back in time and tried to fix it. I don't know, but anyway, yeah, I know these are just my thoughts on Half-Life, PC gaming, innovation in general. And the last time I think there was a game that was sold on the technical prowess or innovation of it was Cyberpunk, where it's like this massive city, all this stuff going on, there's going to be so much to do. And that's kind of like what games are kind of moving in the direction of. Even Rockstar is saying, okay, well, we have this giant fictional world of Grand Theft Auto, and now that's become kind of our standard. And then they realize, oh, well, what do we do beyond this? We can't make the world any bigger because then it's just ridiculous. And then they realize they just have to keep adding more mechanics and more stuff. And Rockstar has turned a game about a virtual reality, about a game to a real reality. And Rockstar games are now becoming more like Sims and simulation games. Like, okay, we have to simulate, the friggin' like horse genitals and in the cold temperature, they'll shrivel up. It's like someone programmed that because they're kind of out of ideas. Like, okay, how much closer to reality can we get? And it's a very sad, weird state to be in where they can't live up to their own expectations or their fan expectations. And a lot of the things that I've realized as a gamer that I've asked for and wanted from developers for a long, long time, realized I wouldn't even like that if I got it. I was recently playing a game called Bloomtown. And it was a combination of, it was basically Persona 5's style of story, gameplay, but told in the aesthetics and presentation of like an Earthbound game. And I thought, wow, that sounds really cool. As I was playing it, and I realized I'm not having fun, and this isn't the game I want to play. Like this, like it sounds cool in theory and in concept, but I'm actually playing it and I'm not really into it. And I realized because, oh yeah, the mechanics of Persona 5, I already know what those are, and those came out like 10 years ago. And then I thought of another game like Black Souls versus Dark Souls. And yes, Black Souls is kind of a ripoff of Dark Souls, but it's in a JRPG format. And so the game kind of fundamentally works differently. And the actions you do in the game, and like the biggest thing is that you can pick up souls like Black Souls, Red Souls that add to your stats instead of leveling up, which is your main way of getting stronger, honestly. And so even that change to the formula from like an indie kind of E game by like I assume a Japanese indie developer, that was more memorable than, you know, other Souls-like clones, because they actually changed the mechanics of the game. And so again, I have to give my respect to Nintendo, but really Gaben here, because they could have just pumped out Half-Life episode after episode after episode after episode, or, you know, dropped Half-Life 3, made a ton of money. But he really stuck. It shows Valve as a company that they stick to their problems, to their solutions, to their philosophy, that they say that if we can't make a unique, mechanical, interesting experience, we're not going to bother doing it. And like, I have to respect them for that, because yeah, I could sit here and say, and even as a PC, let's pretend I was in love with Half-Life 2 and I wanted Half-Life 3. If I got Half-Life 3, it would be like, it would just be Half-Life 2 episode 3. Like, there wouldn't be anything to justify Half-Life 3. If there was anything that is close to Half-Life 3, I just said it'd be Crysis, or it would be something like a completely different series or developer. It would be I don't know, I think one of the most interesting games I've played mechanically is like Hyper Demon, where you can see things behind you and you have this massive FOV. And yeah, and you look at that too, where it's just like, you know, the development of games, even the development of the same series, aside from technical prowess, there's the story and atmosphere perspective where it gets totally lost. Like think of the Halo series. The Halo 1, 2, and 3 atmospheres are very, very different. Mechanically, I mean, they're still also pretty different, but the atmosphere and the tone of each game is very, very different. But yeah, you know, with these kinds of games, like, something is always lost and changed and needs to be changed. Because yeah, I could play a sequel to a game and it could be the exact same mechanics and it would not feel memorable because of that. And I guess as a gamer, I really, in my own thing, for someone who plays games for story, I really undersell or underappreciate the mechanics of a game. That if it's not different in a meaningful way, then yeah, it's like, maybe I really don't care what the story is. If it's too similar to something I've already played, then yeah, why bother? I mean, there are some exceptions. Like, I think like a Souls-like that I really enjoyed was Code Vein. It had some different mechanics where it had all these different gifts, and as you use them, they level up. But who am I kidding? It just, you know, it was pretty much the same gameplay, but with a different anime, like weird cyberpunk aesthetic thing. Yeah, I don't know. It's just so interesting how what we think we want, if we got it, we wouldn't like it. So I think if we ever got Half-Life 3, I wouldn't like it, or PC gamers wouldn't like it, because it wouldn't be the game that everyone said is super amazing, because it doesn't push the technology. And there's many times like that in the sequel or the third game in a trilogy where it just does not live up to the hype. Like Prince of Persia, Two Thrones. You know, oh no, there's like another guy and you control him. Like, okay, whatever. There's kind of already in the past game. Trying to think of another series. Like, they made the third game just for the heck of making a third game. Like, it didn't really justify it mechanically. It was more or less the same game, just with updated graphics or something. Modern Warfare 3, I would say, the original one, it added, you could change scopes, you know, and there was really nothing amazing or good about that on Modern Warfare 3. Even the story wasn't very good. You know, the small story that it did have going was not amazing. So yeah, it's just an interesting, you know, interception of innovation, technology, art, design, story, philosophy, and how some things work and some things don't. And honestly, I think Gaben's idea to let Half-Life 3 live as a legend rather than a failed half-baked product. Oh, Duke Nukem Forever, perfect example. That was a perfect example of a super hyped, if not overhyped game where they were making it, and they actually they released it, but they tried to cancel it. And when you play it, you realize why, because Duke Nukem, which made its name off, you know, the tone and style and like almost a parody of the Doom clones and late boomer shooters of the late 90s, suddenly its sequel is just ripping off and copying what all the modern game FPSs are doing, but they just bring Duke's personality to it, isn't enough to sell the game. And it's not mechanically fun, it's not mechanically interesting, and you just kind of realize, oh wow, this really sucks. So I think if they actually finally release something like Half-Life 3 or even Half-Life 2 Episode 3, it would be something like a Duke Nukem Forever. It would just be a failed product that would not, it would tarnish the reputation more than save it. And so they decided to keep the reputation as the makers of the greatest PC game ever made, and then just kind of move on with a bunch of new projects. I mean, they'll always do something different, from Portal to Artifact or whatever. Steam in general as the main PC hub is, a godsend, frankly. But they just let it live as a legend. They said, it has to be good or we're not going to make it. It has to be innovational and exceptional or we're not going to do it. And I don't know, like, you have to respect them for sticking to their guns and being really real innovators and real visionaries, and saying we're not going to pursue something just for the sake of capital. So there's this Steam store, but an Artifact, you could argue. But yeah, I guess it's just so interesting, the disillusionment, the idea, and the perspective of things. I'm even realizing there's plenty of ideas I've had for games that I realize now that would be a terrible idea. Like, what if we just did this game and this game and like smushed them together? Then people would just say, oh, this is just what this is, and it's not interesting or original or new. And in general now, I think that's what is missing from the games industry, is that it's very new in the early 2000s. There are a lot of different development kits, a lot of different tools you could use, and because of that, everything was fundamentally different. Now everyone uses Unity. Now everyone's using the same toolbox basically to make the same game, just remixing it slightly and in slightly different ways, and all those weird little nuances of how like the menu works and like even the sounds it makes are just kind of lost, and no one really does it anymore and doesn't care. And so therefore the creativity in the industry, and plus it's super saturated with commercialized stuff now, it's just not going to ever recover from that. And it's gone. That era of gaming is literally gone. There's nothing you can do to bring it back. And again, even on the physics, they're still struggling with that. The last time a game's physics were used in a non-gimmicky way was probably Tears of the Kingdom, and people praise that as like one of the best games ever. It's like, I don't know why Half-Life 2 mastered a physics engine in 2004, and game developers just can't keep up with it. It has to be a matter of effort and design rather than technological limitations and ability. That's the only thing I can say. And it's so interesting that we're at this point now where people kind of look back on this with both very good and very bad things to say. Like, this innovated a ton in very smart, cool, weird, interesting ways. And on other times and on other aspects, they've just been, I wouldn't say nothing in Half-Life 2 has aged poorly, but everything about Half-Life 2 has been overhyped by a select group of people who have a select view of gaming and what a video game should be. And with that, I think I just have to put the nail in the coffin and say goodbye to Half-Life 2 and Valve and everything. But yeah, that's basically my thoughts on the Half-Life 2 anniversary, the industry, the state of the industry now, and everything. So yeah, that's it. Bye.